At some point in your game development, you'll run into having to save the state of objects. So in this case, let's say the state of the open chest, the state of how awake our manatee is, and what was collected. I thought I could wait until having to figure out save load to a file, but in my case I am using Unreal Engine 5's World Partition, and so my actors are actually streamed in. They are spatially loaded, which just means that whenever I leave that area and I come back, they're loaded back in. I thought it didn't have any issue. Sometimes the jelly beans will come back, sometimes the chest was closed back again. I just made sure to kind of isolate the problem in a test map so that I could easily see the problem. If I left far enough, and then garbage collection usually happens every 60 seconds, so I didn't want to wait 60 seconds. I used a cheat gc.force collect garbage every frame, and I'm going to go back to 0. Okay, and then when it came back, you can see that my collectibles are back and my chest is closed again. This didn't feel good as a player. I guess you do get more collectibles, but it doesn't really give the whole feeling of progression. So just to show my test map, I just selected any item that should retain some sort of state because the player will go back to that area. I made a new world partition or open level, and I changed the cell size as small as it could be. So if I press 0, it goes back to 1600. So I'm thinking this is the minimum. And I also changed the loading range to also be really small. Yeah, this is a perfect little gym to test out my problem and test out solutions, which I will share in this video. And I chose one from Epic, but there's 2 honorable mention that I want to mention later. And as an extra detail, if I click on any of my actors or actor instances, I go to the details panel and then streaming under the World Partition category. You can see that this is spatially loaded. So we wouldn't particularly have this problem if we were not spatially loaded, but it kind of feels like a waste to have a bunch of actors that are always loaded and that don't need to exist. Let's say there's a chest behind this mountain. It really doesn't need to exist, or I don't need to know that it's open at the moment. The thing about World Partition that I didn't think about when I chose it, for some reason I kind of assumed that the objects still existed when they were unloaded and they're just waiting to be loaded back in. But what I noticed is that after they're unloaded, after a while, they are garbage collected. There's nothing for this instance to remember about their state. Like, were they opened? Were they awoken? Were they destroyed? Even the destroyed actors in a world partition is still waiting to be loaded back in, even after being destroyed. So I looked online for a few different solutions. I like to avoid reinventing the wheel as much as I can. I can spend more interesting time figuring out fun game mechanics instead of implementing a save state for World Partition. There's nothing wrong with using something that already exists. And this is how I stumble on this Unreal Engine world building guide and this one section, important changes in 5.3. So this is when this plugin that I've chosen as my solution started to exist. It's called the level streaming persistency. I honestly just saw 2 documents or 2 websites even mentioning it, and this is one of the 2. I was so happy to see that it does exactly what I need. I will share this link for sure. All you need to do is you need to just enable this plugin, and then you just need to define in a configuration file what are the properties or the variables that you want to save. And that's it. There's also a note that it can be used to save to disk, though I haven't dug too much into that. For now, this is enough for the demo that I'm working on, and saving to disk will be really good for the game. Another thing that's important to note is that this plugin is experimental. If I go to the public roadmap, you can find it in the Unreal Engine 5.3 notes, and it is experimental. As a call of action, it would be fantastic if you also end up loving this plugin as much as I do to just give feedback on how important that would be. I think I sent one in important. So thank you, Jean-Sébastien, or whoever worked on this plugin. One thing to note is that even if one day this plugin is abandoned, it still changed my thinking to just make sure that I have load and save in mind for my actors. So let's say I have a variable for is chest open or was interacted with. And that kind of setup, I could easily change it to another system or another solution, and everything would already be in place. A little tutorial on how to enable it and use it. So I'm going to go to my edit plugin, and then I'm going to search for persistence. And there it is. There's our level streaming persistent plugin by Epic Games. And it says in big purple that it's experimental. And then you'll have to reopen your project. And in my case, I already had all the properties that I wanted to keep. So I'm just going to uncomment all of those. You could also have this working in a blueprint project. And in that case, it would mostly be paths like these here. So yeah, go ahead and reopen your Unreal Engine if you're following through this tutorial bit. If you want to make an actor that has a state and you need to find its relative path, what you can do, you can go to it. I have a chest or a lock chest, and then I can just copy the object path, and that's the one I will be using in the configuration file. So if I paste that in, you can see that it pretty much matches these ones. I added the _C. I am not sure if that's needed, but _C for class. I can see that in the documentation, they don't have it. So you probably don't need that. And then for an example of a property that has a persistence, I created a variable in my chest actor. So I just called it was opened, and I'll put them side by side. Okay, so I'm just going to delete this. I don't need that. You can see that in my code section, all I needed was the class path and then the variable name. And one thing I haven't experimented too much is in the documentation or in that little paragraph, it just shows that there's private properties versus persistent properties or public. Some of them can be modified even when they're not streamed in, versus if only for private, it's only when it's streamed in. I just needed private because I just care about that variable when the actor is loaded in, and I wanted to update like it was already interacted or if it was already picked up. And then the only logic I do with that information is whenever the chess begins play, if it was already opened, I called a blueprint implementable event, and I just make sure that the interaction volume has no collisions, so you can't interact with the chest. And then on open, okay, so it is a blueprint native event, and in the code implementation, all I do is I change my variable to true, which is sort of overkill for whenever you load as in you were already opened, but it's good to expose a function to your blueprint so that you can do all sorts of visuals on blueprint side. Let's say you have a VFX that you don't want to run because you were already open, and in my case, I've implemented the blueprint event. So I call the parent so that the code is still called. And then based on if it started as open, if it's true, I set the playback position to be the last timeline frame. And the timeline is basically the animation I play for the chest opening. So whenever the chest was already open and you load it back in, I didn't want the animation of the chest opening to play. Some games, they do that you get back into a level and suddenly everything opens up. It just kind of feels weird that it opens by itself. So I'd rather just skip to the display or visual state that the object was in. And then it plays it, which just plays that last frame. All of my objects, they have unique logic. So the manatee, if it was already awakened, then I just skip to the montage of it just idling. These ones stay collected, and same with the currency. One thing that I found a little tough to work with was choosing to destroy the actors or not destroy them, because those are loaded in. After you collect them and destroy them, the World Partition will still try to spawn them back in. So I had the choice of either having spawners. So this is just a coin spawner that if it was not collected, it will spawn an actor. And then that actor is the one you actually collect. This one's a little more complex because I used the game feature technique. So it's spawned in from another plugin, but essentially it's just spawning an actor and then that actor get destroyed. And then my other solution was essentially after you collect an item and it's spatially loaded, it stays alive, but I just turn off, I'll show you here. So if the item was already picked up, or if we pick it up, I deactivate the Niagara components, I stop the rotating movement, pick upable. Yeah, so essentially for my pick upable actors, I save the previous transform, and I essentially just hide and disable the actor, which just means that I disable the collisions and I stop taking them, and I also hide the actor in game. It feels weird to have these just stick around all the time. For these ones, I might as well have set them to be spatially loaded. But yeah, until I figure the best way to handle destruction, I will keep it this way. But yeah, so now that they all have one variable that persists even after they're destroyed, whenever they get loaded back in, so now that I've actually rebuilt my solution, it does require you to restart every time you change those configuration files. So yeah, I'm just gonna go play and interact with everything. And then when I leave, I collect the garbage and then turn it off. So already a good sign, I saw my manatee. The bad sign is that that jelly bean was back. Interesting. Essentially what was happening is that the currency actor, which was spawned by the currency spawner component that is added to this actor here. So this is basically, it spawns this currency. This currency was setting its lifespan to 3 seconds. So if I left before 3 seconds, it wouldn't let the currency spawner component know that it was picked up. So it pretty much, I probably just have to add a delegate and listen to it and communicate that my coin will know that it's been picked up. So the spawner route might be a bit more trickier. I probably need to clean up this whole thing. I just figured I'd leave this in the video because this is the kind of issues you'll probably run into. Back in my, I guess, game feature spawned component, instead of binding to the death of this spawned jelly, I can on picked up delegate. I'm gonna assign on picked up delegate. So if my spawn jelly is valid, then I set up that it was picked up. So I'm just gonna remove this, and I'm gonna make sure to unbind it at the end. So if your spawn jelly is valid, unbind from, it gets picked up. Yeah. Okay, so there you go. It's not the prettiest. There you go. I just make sure to destroy it anyways. So whenever it ends play, which this is called when you're streamed out, so the reason will actually say streamed. Okay, so if your spawn jelly is still existing, then we make sure to destroy it and unbind. That should fix things. Now that I'm communicating to my spawner, okay, so I called it right away, and now it knows that it was collected. And this is the variable that I set in my configuration file to remember its state. If I leave, and then I call the garbage collection, and I come back, sweet, okay, my jelly bean isn't there. This specific case, I wouldn't have seen it unless I had my little test map, because my world is pretty big, so the chances of running into it were really small, but I'm sure I would have run into it at some point, and then the player would just get way more jelly beans than they're supposed to get. So I wanted to spend a little time covering other possible solutions. Let's say an experimental feature from Epic is not really your cup of tea and you want something else. So either you can roll your own logic. I didn't spend too much time thinking about, to be honest, but probably save the data to something more persistent like the game state or the game instance. But there are other solutions out there. I stumble on SPUD or SPUD, Persistent Unreal Data Library, and this one's been around since 2021, and the video really impressed me, and so you can check it out. It saves a bunch of different states like the position. It doesn't have to do with the world partition either. It also saves the destroyed state, so it takes care of that problem that I had. You can also set which item you care to persist or to save the data, and it works with save load functionality. So yeah, I'll post that link in the description. And as another side note for SPUD, there are 13 contributors. And, you know, sometimes one developer, like whatever I would roll out, would not compare to something that has been worked on since 2021. I'd be curious to know if anyone's used the SPUD and to give some feedback in the comments. There's another one that I'm not too sure if it's for the World Partition, but I'm a big fan of Rama. Oh, it's called the Rama save system. And there's a bit about saving and optimizing how you save, so serializing. And I'm sure it's a treasure trove of information and documentation, but I just avoided it for now because I'm not sure about it supporting World Partition. If you like this way of setting up what persists, maybe you have some switches in your game that you just want to save, okay, this was interacted with, so it will have the right position, it won't be interactable, maybe a door that's been open, then I would love it if you, I'm not sure how much this helps, but if you give feedback here on how this is important to you, and it would be fantastic if one day before I release my game, or before you release your game, that this won't be experimental anymore. So yeah, it's been nice having some persistence in my demo, and so now players can feel a sense of progression, that they've collected things, that they're making a difference in the world. I don't know why I waited so long to look into this, and I got really lucky with my timing. Yeah, this suits my needs at the moment, and I hope it helps you too. And if you're interested in more World Partition stuff, you can click on the recommended video over here. And as always, thank you for watching, and thank you so much, Patreons, and I'll see you in the next one.